At dinner that night, my mom set her fork down, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "We want a daughter-in-law and grandkids. Soon." I remember just sitting there, my mouth halfway open because who even starts a conversation like that? Dad didn't even blink. He just kept nodding like they'd rehearsed it. And I'm thinking, okay, is this supposed to be casual? Is this a demand? You ever have one of those moments where you suddenly realize you're not in the same conversation as everyone else? Yeah, that was me. Truth is, I laughed at first. I thought maybe they were joking, just poking fun at me for being single at 34. But Mom wasn't smiling. Dad leaned back, crossed his arms, and said, "You're not getting any younger, son." That hit harder than it should have. I wanted to say something smart back, but I just sat there. The air at that table felt heavier than usual. The roast chicken on my plate suddenly didn't look so appetizing. And here's the thing, my parents don't normally push like that. Sure, they'll hint about dating, maybe drop a, "Have you met so-and-so's daughter?" But this felt like an ultimatum. I left that night with this weird knot in my stomach. And guess what? 3 days later, something happened that made that dinner look like a warm-up. But before we get there, you need to know why this whole thing hit me so differently. See, I've been in one serious relationship in my life. Her name was Emily. We dated for almost 5 years, lived together for 3, and yeah, I thought we were headed for the whole marriage and kids package. But life had other plans. One day she told me she needed space, and the next thing I knew, she'd moved out and was posting pictures with some guy from her gym. That was 4 years ago, and I never really put myself back out there. Not seriously, anyway. So when my parents started in on the daughter-in-law and grandkids talk, all it did was remind me of what I'd lost and what I hadn't found since. But here's where it gets weird. The day after that dinner, Mom texted me this smiley face emoji. No words, just a smiley. Which, if you know my mom, is suspicious. She's not an emoji person. I replied with, "Hey, what's up?" And she just said, "Oh, nothing. You'll see." That's not a normal mom response. I brushed it off, but it stayed in the back of my head. Then, the very next day, I get a call from my cousin Mark. Now, Mark's a talker, the kind who will keep you on the phone for 4 or 5 minutes about how his dog's doing. But this time, he sounded careful, like he was trying not to say too much. "Hey man," he said, "your folks told me they were, working on something for you." What does that even mean? I pressed him, but all he said was, "You'll find out soon." And that's when my gut told me something was brewing. The kind of something you don't get to vote on. I spent the rest of that day half expecting my parents to show up at my apartment with a stranger in tow, smiling like they'd just fixed my life. And not gonna lie, part of me was dreading it, part of me was curious. Because, yeah, I'd been alone a while. And loneliness has a way of making you consider things you swore you wouldn't. That night, I barely slept. Every little sound outside made me wonder if someone was pulling up in the driveway. I know it sounds dramatic, but my family, when they get an idea, they don't just talk about it. They make it happen. And then came the third day. I was making coffee, half awake, when I heard a knock at my door. Not the polite kind either, it was the heavy, confident knock of someone who knows you're home. My first thought, yep, this is it. I opened the door, and there she was, a woman I'd never seen before, standing there with this awkward smile, holding a casserole dish. "Hi," she said. "I'm Claire. Your parents told me you could use some company." My brain just froze. I just stood there, holding the door, trying to figure out if this was some kind of prank. You know that split second where you're running through every possible scenario in your head? Yeah, that was me. Claire shifted the casserole from one hand to the other and kind of laughed. Like she knew this was weird but was rolling with it anyway. "Your mom said you like lasagna," she added, as if that was going to make the situation feel less bizarre. And I'm thinking, oh, so this is a setup. An actual, old-fashioned, straight out of a rom-com setup, except nobody told me I was supposed to be in the movie. I stepped aside, let her in, mostly because standing there in the doorway felt more awkward than letting a total stranger into my kitchen. She walked straight to the counter, set down the dish, and started looking around like she was taking mental notes. "Nice place," she said. And I swear there was a tone in her voice like she was checking me off some invisible list. Truth is, Claire wasn't what I expected. She was maybe early 30s. Dark hair pulled back, wearing jeans and a simple sweater. Nothing flashy. Nothing, "I'm here to impress." But she had this confidence, like she already knew she belonged in whatever room she stepped into. "So, my parents just gave you my address?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light but probably sounding more suspicious than I meant to. She smiled again, but it was the kind of smile you give when you're about to admit to something. "Well, they told me you could use a friend. And maybe more." I think their exact words were, "future daughter-in-law material." I nearly choked on my coffee. "They said that? Out loud?" She nodded, sipping from a travel mug she'd brought with her. "Pretty much. And here's the thing, part of me wanted to be angry. Like really angry. That they'd crossed such a huge line without even asking me. But another part of me was curious. Who was this woman they thought was such a perfect match? And why was she going along with it? We sat down, and before I could launch into my list of, "So how exactly did this happen?" questions, Claire just started talking. About her job, she's a graphic designer. About how she'd moved back to town after her mom got sick. About how my parents had met her at church and decided she had a good head on her shoulders. I could feel my jaw tightening the more she spoke. Not because of anything she was saying, but because of how clearly I could see my parents orchestrating all of this like some backroom marriage deal. You ever get that itch between your shoulder blades when you realize you're being managed? Yeah, that. At one point, Claire leaned forward and said, "Look, I know this is awkward for you. It's awkward for me too. But they seemed so invested. I figured I'd at least come by and say hi." And I didn't know what to say to that, because she wasn't wrong. My parents don't do anything halfway. If they've decided on something, it's basically set in stone unless you blow it up yourself. And blowing this up would make me the bad guy. We talked for maybe an hour. Just surface-level stuff. But there was this undercurrent like we were both aware there was an audience somewhere waiting for a progress report. When she left, casserole still on the counter, she said, "I'll probably see you soon. Not maybe, not if you want, just probably." And the way she said it, I believed her. That night, my phone lit up with a text from Mom. "So, what do you think?" No hello. No preamble. Just straight to it. I stared at the screen for a long minute, then typed back, "She seems nice, but this is a little much." Mom replied with a thumbs-up emoji. That's it. Which, again, was wildly suspicious. Because if you knew my mom, you'd know she'd normally follow that up with a whole paragraph. The next day, I ran into Mark at the grocery store. He gave me this big grin and said, "So, you met her?" I asked how he knew, and he just said, "Everyone knows, man. They've been talking about it since Sunday." That's when it hit me this wasn't just a family thing. My parents had made this into a whole community project. Like the entire extended family and half the church were now invested in whether I'd marry Claire. And here's the kicker: later that afternoon, Claire called me. Not texted, called. "Hey," she said, "do you want to come over for dinner tomorrow? I'll make something other than lasagna." I hesitated, because part of me knew that if I said yes, I was stepping into their little plan. But part of me wanted to see where this was going. So I said, "Sure." And the second I hung up, I got that same weird knot in my stomach I'd had after the dinner with my parents. Only this time, It was mixed with something else. Anticipation. So the next evening I drove over to Claire's place telling myself this was just dinner. Nothing more. No strings attached. You know, like saying you're just browsing at a car dealership. Yeah, we all know how that goes. Her place was small but cozy. The kind of home that tells you someone actually lives there, not just exists there. She had music playing low in the background, something jazzy, and the smell of garlic hit me the second I stepped inside. "Hey," she said with that same confident smile. "Hope you're hungry." I tried to act normal, but truth is, my head was a mess. Half of me was wondering if my parents had given her some kind of checklist to run through, and the other half was, well, wondering what it would be like if I actually liked her. We sat down, started eating, and for a while it was just easy conversation. She told me a funny story about her neighbor's cat getting stuck in her laundry room, and I found myself laughing, like genuinely laughing for the first time in a long time. And then, she got quiet. She set her fork down, looked at me and said, "So, your parents told me about Emily." My stomach dropped. "They did?" She nodded, almost apologetic. "They said you've been guarded since then, that maybe you just needed the right person to open up again." I didn't know whether to be mad that they'd shared something so personal or relieved that she knew without me having to explain. "Look," she said, leaning in. "I'm not here because I'm desperate or because your parents think we'd make cute kids. I'm here because I like the way they talk about you, and because I think maybe you've been alone long enough." That hit me in a place I didn't want to admit existed. I tried to change the subject, but before I could, there was a knock at her door. She frowned, got up to answer it, and when she opened it, I heard my mom's voice. "Well, how's it going?" My mom and dad standing there, smiling like they were delivering a cake to a bake sale. I nearly choked on my wine. "Mom? Dad? What are you doing here?" They just walked in, like this was the most normal thing in the world. Dad patted me on the shoulder. Mom went straight to the kitchen to check the food, and Claire was just standing there, caught between amused and horrified. "We thought we'd stop by, you know. Say hello," Dad said, grabbing a chair. And here's the thing, I should have been furious. I should have kicked them out, but instead, I just sat there, because part of me wanted to see what game they were playing. The conversation that followed was surreal. Mom asking Claire about her job. Dad talking about how nice it is to see our boy with such good company. Me trying not to slam my head on the table. And then, Mom pulled something out of her purse. A small, wrapped box. She slid it across the table to me and said, "Open it." I hesitated, unwrapped it, and inside was a key. "To the house?" Mom said. "The big one on Maple Street. We bought it years ago. Thought it might be time to pass it on." I just stared at her. "You're giving me a house?" She shook her head. "No. Not just you. You, and whoever you build a life with." That's when it clicked. Their whole push for a daughter-in-law. The sudden setup with Claire. The smiley face text. This wasn't just about grandkids. This was about control. About making sure the life I built fit their picture. And here's the part that really got me. Claire didn't look shocked. She looked like she already knew. After they left, because yes, they eventually left, probably thinking they'd just sealed the deal. I asked her straight up, "Did you know about the house?" She hesitated, then nodded. "They mentioned it. Said it could be ours if we got serious." I just sat there, staring at her. Stared and waited. And she didn't flinch. "Look," she said, "I like you. But if you think this is some kind of trap, maybe you should tell them that. Because I'm not here for a house. I'm here for you." And I didn't know whether to believe her or not. Here's the twist. Though 3 days after that dinner with my parents, I wasn't just meeting Claire. I was meeting the life they'd planned out for me. And realizing I had a choice. take the key, play along and maybe get everything they wanted for me, or hand it back, and finally live on my own terms. And guess what? I haven't told them my decision yet.